Hey everybody, it's Adam back again from the Army Painter with another video tutorial. Today we're going to be painting up a Dark Angels Deathwing Captain. This is a new model from one of their new boxed set release games. A good friend of mine, Vinny, is a big time Dark Angels player, so I wanted to paint this up in a way that he could appreciate. So let's take a look at some of the products that we're going to be using today. By now you should have assembled your model. I prime mine with Color Primer Skeleton Bone Spray. So grab some clean water, the paints that you want to use, your wet palette, and a clean brush, and let's get started. All right, so here we have our Space Captain. We've got him kitted out. We're going to paint him in bone armor. Now, I've started with skeleton bone. And what I like to do with these power armor type models is I like to begin with a post shade. Now for that I'm going to be using a bit of Werewolf Fur, and I'm just going to add this to the lower parts of the model. Sorry, the airbrush is a bit loud. You can see here I'm just working that in very gently like so. I love using the airbrush and our Airbrush Medium. It makes using the airbrush very, very, very simple. It's 2-in-1 flow improver and thinner. Sure you clean your tip, and then I'm gonna focus here on the bottom of the shoulder pad and under the arms like so. This also helps to take away any of the areas that I might have missed in the priming stage. And don't worry, if you don't have an airbrush, you can always go back and fix your mistakes with the brush, because our color primers are a 100% match to our war paints of the same name. It's okay if you get a little bit messy at this point, because this is just a post shade. We are going to come back with our starting color in just a moment. And now we've got our skeleton bone mixed in with our Airbrush Medium, and I'm just going to go in, I'm going to clean up some of that pre-shade. Just a little bit, very lightly. You almost want the pre-shade, it's something that you barely see. It becomes like natural shade on the model. You want to focus on the areas that the light is going to hit the most at the beginning. Get a nice smooth coat of that skeleton bone. Now if you're very careful, you can begin base coating the shield with your airbrush and then just clean up anything else after the fact. I'm using a little bit of chaotic red here, and this is just going to save me a little bit of time. So I like to use the airbrush. You can see I'm going to spray a bit on those fingers. It's okay, I'll just clean it up with pure skeleton bone a bit later. Give that some time to dry, and then if you'd like to, you can always come back and apply a second quick coat. Now with a bit of Dragon Red, I'm just going to focus. Now with a bit of Dragon Red, I'm just going to focus this on the upper portion of the shield here. And you're going to want to let that chaotic red exist at the bottom. So one thing that the airbrush is great at is helping you to achieve a very smooth gradient. And now we'll apply a very conservative application of pure red at the very top third of this shield. Reds take forever to layer up because they are one of the weaker pigments, so working with an airbrush really saves you some time and allows you to get some really nice, smooth coverage. All right, using our Masterclass Drybrush, this is our miniature dry brush, I'm going to build up some stippled layers of skeleton bone. You may be asking, why are you doing that when you've already painted skeleton bone on the model several times? It's because I want to add some texture to this model, and I need to start somewhere. So what I'm doing, and you can see that this skeleton bone application, this stipple, is actually working its way into the base coat and over top of our pre-blend, our pre-shadow, of the werewolf fur. And that's intentional here. We want to add this texture, and we want to give this model a nice textured appearance as opposed to just super smooth. Anything to add visual interest to your model. Now, this isn't like a dry brush where you're working with extremely dry paints. It's actually a benefit to be working with slightly looser paints, but tricky part is getting the right amount of paints on your bristles, and that's just something that you're going to have to experiment with. There's no magic secret to success. So I suggest practicing around, and I like having a nice hard palette nearby. Sometimes I will use the back of, or actually the lid of, the Army Painter wet palette to do this. So I'm just going around the model and very lightly dabbing our somewhat loose application of this skeleton bone all across the model, helping to blend in that natural gradient that we achieved with our airbrush. Moving on to our next stipple highlight, I have some drake tooth, and this is a nice grayish bone tone, and I'm going to apply this in the center areas of where we previously painted and stippled in with our skeleton bone. Now, there's going to be some crossover, and that's okay. In some areas you want that drake tooth to kind of take over the skeleton bone, and that's okay. And now I've got some brain matter beige, and I'm just going to apply this in the same fashion, but I'm going to focus it a little bit more towards the center of the areas and the most raised edges. This front of the helmet is a really good way to showcase this. And you see when I'm doing this, I'm just dabbing, I'm twisting the model in my hands and the brush at the same time to make sure I get a somewhat even distribution of the stippling effect on the model. I've got a bit of light tone, and I have thinned it down with our Quickshade wash mixing medium as well as our airbrush medium. The airbrush medium is just gonna give it some runniness, some thinness that I like. I prefer it over to thinning it with just water, and I'm just gonna apply this all over the armor on the model. Now, this is going to act both as a wash and a glaze. It's going to tone all of the colors that we stippled and airbrushed back together, number one, and then it's going to work its way into the recesses, and thinning it down with that airbrush medium really helps it to do just that. And we will come back in later steps and apply a more concentrated wash, a darker wash, in the recessed areas that we really want to have some serious definition in. But as you can see, even as I'm applying this and it's still wet on the model, you can see it really does a great job of blending these colors together on the model. Just go about doing this all across the model. Careful that this wash glaze, as I'm going to call this today, doesn't pull up too much. If it does, just quickly take your brush and wick it away. All right, now we've allowed that wash to dry, and I'm taking a little bit of soft tone, and I'm just going to reinforce some of the shading on this model, and this is just going to be a more focused wash. I'm just going to apply this into the recesses like you can see here. This is not an all over wash. We're just going to apply this where we really want that shadow to take a deep effect. Areas like here around the bottom of the boots and the feet armor, like so. I'm just using a character brush here, and this is perfect because it holds quite a bit of the wash that we want, but it still holds a very fine tip to get into these recessed areas. And areas like around the skull on his knee pad, I'm just going to worry about washing the underside, leaving the top in the original light tone that we applied before. Other areas that we might want to focus this wash is just around this piece of chest armor, like so, And you can apply this in layers just to build it up till you get the right level of contrast that you want. Now that the wash has had a little bit of time to dry, I'm just going around and I'm finding the raised areas on the model, and I'm applying just a very subtle highlight of Drake Tooth. This is our first highlight, and what I'm doing is I'm just going to find the hard edges around the model. You can see here it's a little bit tricky underneath the handle of the sword, so I'm just moving the model a little bit to pull that highlight. So I'm just using very watered down paints, and I'm just going to pull these highlights very carefully around these areas of the model. If you feel like you went a little bit overboard, you could always go back with a little bit of skeleton bone and just reestablish and fix any mistakes that you do make. All right, so we've gone ahead and applied our Drake Tooth highlight all over the model. Now I've got a little bit of brain matter beige, and I'm just going to focus this in over top of the areas that we previously highlighted in Drake Tooth and just pick out the most extreme details. I've thinned this down a bit on my wet palette, and you can see now it's really starting to pop. A really good place to showcase this is on this rondel right here. The rundle, I think, is how it's pronounced. This little shield armor on his chest piece, his breastplate. So I'm just finding the most extreme areas and applying this. This is a near white highlight, and this is really going to make the details on the model stand out. Another area that you'll want to focus on is just the bridge of his helmet here, and of course the nose of his helmet, like so. Right, now I'm going to show you a couple optional steps that I really love to do, especially when I'm painting up power armored type models, no matter what range they come from. Now I take a bit of matte white, the brightest color that I can, working with whatever color tone I am. In this case, I'm working with the skeleton bone, and I'm just going to find some areas that have some pretty sharp edges, like here and here, and just find some areas around the model to add in a very bright spot highlight. So I might add one just right there, and I'm just adding a little dot of pure matte white. And I'm not being super precise. It can be a little bit bigger than your highlight. That's okay, because what we're doing is we're adding a very simple illusion that the light is bouncing off these parts of the models. There you go. And I'll find an area like we have this boot, we have this piece of armor here, and then the shin armor, and I'll draw somewhat of a straight line and add a dot down it, just an imaginary dot. Now here on the back of the panel, I'll start from the top here, and I'm just going to add one there. I might even add one to the top where I didn't apply a highlight, and then one down there, one down there. And it gives a very simple effect, like it's reflecting light. Like I said, this is totally optional, but it's a simple way just to add another layer of dimension to your model, whatever model you are painting. Oh, and here, this little exhaust port, I like to add one there, and then one there. This is very simple stuff. I'm using matte white once again. Just going to pick out some of the extreme areas, and then on the areas like this, on the tips of the wings on his back, I'll just add a little extra highlight. Again, this is just to give the illusion that we're getting a little bit of a reflection on the armor. Nothing too advanced, just very simple. Another optional effect is to take a dark color. In this case, we could use a dark gray like Necromancer Cloak. I've got dirt spatter. I'm going to use a little bit of brown, and I'm going to do almost a similar effect, but this time I'm just going to apply little dots into some of the chunky highlights to give a chipped effect. And this is just a very simple way to add some weathering to the model. So, some areas where you've already pulled a very clean highlight, you might want to go back and just take a little bit of that Drake Tooth and go ahead and make some squiggly lines there. Give it a moment to dry, then grab your dirt spatter, and you're just going to apply a little dot, just a couple dots right on the edge there to give the illusion that there's chipping in the armor, just like that. So that about does it for the white armor. Now I'm going to go about basing in all of the areas that I want to be green, like the robes that he's wearing here, or tunic, whatever you want to call that. and also this eagle emblem on his chest. So I've taken a little bit of angel green, and I'm just going to very carefully block this in. I've thinned this down. I'm going to apply 2 very thin coats just so I have a little bit more control. I don't want to obscure any of the details on these robes. Careful here not to go over any of the areas that you've previously painted in bone. You just want to be very careful, take your time, and apply 2 simple thin coats of angel green. All right, and if you've been following along to the latest tutorials, we've been testing out some new metallic colors, and I'm going to apply one of them. This is a new green metallic that we've been working on, and I'm going to use this just on this eagle emblem, these wings that he has on his chest. Really liking this new metallic range that we've been developing. Very bright, vibrant metallics. As you can see on screen, this is a very bright, heavily pigmented green metallic. Think of all kinds of cool, useful ways that you could put this paint to use in future projects. But I think it's going to be a nice complement to the green robes that we're applying to this model. Now that we've applied all of our green tones, I'm going to go ahead and apply a wash. And for this, I am using just straight Quickshade green tone. I'm going to apply this to the recesses very carefully. I don't want to get this on any of the bony areas on the armor that we've previously painted. And what we're looking for here is we just want the pigments from this wash to work its way into the folds and the recesses of the feathers on the eagle emblem, as well as the folds in the robe that he's wearing, this tunic robe that he's wearing. So I'm just going to apply a nice smooth coat of the Quickshade green tone. Don't want it to pull up too much. If you do see it begin to pool, and it will pool in the folds here, that's what we want, but if it begins to pool on any of the flat panels, just be sure to wick it away and work it into the recesses with your brush. So now that we've applied our wash and it's worked its way into the recesses, we're going to go back to our angel green, and we're just going to pick out the highlights on the folds, leaving the wash in the recesses. So very simply, I've just got my angel green. You can see the wash is settled into these folds of this robe on the back of the model. And I'm just going to let it settle there and find the ridges with my angel green just to reestablish that base tone. Now when I'm painting robes, I like to work pretty fast. And I've got a bit of green skin. Now this is a nice, another brighter color, another one of our 100% matching color primer war paint combinations. Now I'm going to apply this green skin while the angel green is still just a little bit wet on the palette. I'm going to work one fold at a time. So I'm starting with this outer fold here. I've applied the green skin to it. I'm going to go back to the angel green, and I'm just going to work it in between just to make it seamless so it's not super bright. Just doing a very simple wet blend to add some nice gradation to this robe. This is completely unnecessary, however. You could just go ahead and begin highlighting, but I think that this gives the robes a nice effect, and it doesn't take a lot of extra time, and it's not a super hard technique to pull off. So I'm going to move on to the fold next to it. And these two kind of meet at this one big fold at the bottom. So at the bottom here, I want it to be the brighter green skin, but in the middle, I want it to remain just a touch closer to that darker angel green. So I'll take that angel green and work it in there very simply. Go back to my green skin. I'm just going to pick out the uppermost folds, the areas that are going to catch the most light. There you go. And again, on to the next fold. So I like working from fold to fold because the paint stays wet and workable before drying, and that allows you to pull off that wet blend process. Now I'm just focusing in pure green skin onto the most extreme areas and the bottoms of the robes. If you find that it's getting a little too bright and your highlight is getting a little too stark and you want that pure, smooth blend. Working with the wet palette enables you to just go right back to your angel green or your mix of angel green and green skin and just work it back. When you're painting in this fashion, it's all about feel. I can't tell you to paint 5 brush strokes here of this color. You have to just feel it out, play around and experiment, and the wet palette really enables you to do just that. I've got a bit of Mouldy Clothes, and I'm just going to apply a final edge highlight just to the most extreme edges and areas very carefully and very subtly. And this pushes that dark bluish green to a more yellow tone green at the highlight. I love using Mouldy Clothes as the final highlight when I'm working with angel green as a base tone. It's just very simply taking very concise and careful brush strokes. I'm going to find the hard edges and just apply a simple edge highlight like so, and just add one simple line of the Mouldy Clothes into our green skin blend, just like that. Now on the back of the model, you have some easier to access hard edges like the side of the robe here. I'm just going to take the side of my brush and apply a simple edge highlight. And I'll go around the bottom of the robes here. Just very carefully. This is basically just tracing this highlight with the edge of your brush. I'm going to go back to my palette, load up my brush with a little bit more of the Mouldy Clothes. And I'm going to find these upper ridges, and I'm just carefully, with the very tip of my brush, going to trace a very simple line to pull those highlights. Now for the metallic green on the chest, I'm just going to go back to our green metallic, and I'm just going to very carefully, with a detail brush, pick out the raised areas. When I've done that, I'm going to mix in a little bit of shining silver just to brighten this up a bit and push it more towards a true metallic metal. We're going to go around and begin basing in all of the areas of the model that we want to be red eventually. Now we already primed. Now we're going to go and base in all of the colors that we want to be red, like this eagle that he has on his shoulder here. I might even do a little bit of freehand work. I'm going to apply a little bit of red to the casing of this dagger here. And I'm just applying just one simple base coat of chaotic red, just to establish the red tones and give our other reds something to sit on top of. I am also going to base in the seals that he has. Now I'm going to paint these up to be an almost pink color, just so it separates itself from the rest of the red. But I'm going to start with chaotic red just to keep things a little bit consistent here and mark these out. Sometimes I do this just so I don't forget about them, because they can get lost as you begin painting up. That's the one thing with these heavily detailed models. It's easy to forget about some of the little details on the model once you get into it. See, I almost missed this one right here. Now with this chaotic red, what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to just apply a very slight freehand. And let me see if I can do this without that sword being in the way. What I'd like to do is just to trace a very simple diagonal line down the shield. There we go. I've got a pretty good line there. And I'm just going to base the rest of this corner of the shield in. There we go. And I'll get these sides of it here, the rondel. And I think I'm going to do the same thing to this knee pad. I'm just going to, a little bit easier here because we've got that skull in the middle, and just find the other side like so. So go around the rest of the model, find the areas that you want to eventually paint in red or pink, and apply this very light coat of chaotic red. Now I have a bit of pure red, and I'm just going to go over the areas that I've previously painted in chaotic red, and you can see how well we're getting this nice bright red coverage. I'll likely apply just 2 very thin coats of pure red to really establish a nice true red tone. pretty soon these reds are going to look very similar to the red that we airbrushed on the shield. So just find all the areas that you want to be red. We'll leave the areas that we will paint pink in the chaotic red for later. But just find the red areas, go ahead and pick them out. Very thin down application. And you can see by starting with that chaotic red, it's okay if you have just a very transparent coat at the bottom of that knee pad there. It almost acts as a natural shadow. Very simply, we just created a zenithal highlight wet blend with our paintbrush. Now we're going to apply just one simple coat of Quickshade red tone all over the red areas of the model. I'm using this right out of the bottle. I haven't thinned this down with anything but just a little bit of water on the tip of my brush. So I'm very simply going to apply this and work that red tone pigment into the recesses to help pull out the details on all of the areas that we've previously painted red. Just very simple here. We're just applying this to add some nice shading and contrast to the model. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring out some of the highlights on the model. I'm starting with pure red just to reestablish that red tone on areas like here, this dagger that he has on his hip. And of course, I'm going to pick out all of the hard corners around the rondel here on his breastplate. Take your time, go about the model. I'm working with very thin down paint here, so I have superior control as I pull these highlights and these hard edges around the interior of this shield just to give it a nice bright red appearance. I've got just a bit of Mars red, and I love this color when highlighting up reds, especially when you start from chaotic red and work your way up through your dragon red and pure red, which are truer red tones. Mars red has a nice orange tint to it, and it's the perfect color to highlight up red. So I'm just going to apply this very sparingly, very conservatively as a hard edge highlight. You see I just pulled a nice sharp line on this dagger, and I'm just going to apply this to the corners here on the shield on his breastplate and pick out some of the rivets if I can see them. I'm just going to go around all of the model and pick out the red details, like this little bit of freehand work that we did on the kneecap and of course on this big shield. I'm just going to work this Mars red into the corners of the previous edge highlights that we made just to make them pop that little bit more. I'll also apply some squiggly lines to add some battle damage. I'll just go back and add some dirt spatter just like we did the armor on the model. Now that all of the red on the model is basically done, I'm going to go back to all those areas that we want it to be pink, like these seals here on the model. And for this, I'm using Warplock Purple, which is actually a very nice carnation pink color. I'm just going to apply this to all of the seals and the areas that we previously painted in chaotic red with the intent to paint pink later on. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of our Quickshade purple tone and I'm just going to apply it to all of the areas that we painted pink. Give that some time to dry, and then we'll come back and apply our first and second highlights. Once our wash has had time to dry, I'm going to go back to the Warlock Purple and just pick out the details. I'm going to let that purple tone sit inside the details and the recesses of these seals around the model. In some areas, like on this one here where there's nothing inside the seal, I'm going to go around the outside and I'll just add just a very subtle dot of the Warlock Purple to the center. And I've got some Centaur Skin, and I'm just going to apply this very sparingly on just little tiny dots and the hardest edges on these seals, and this really gives it some nice three-dimensionality. Moving on to the handle of his sword, I'm just going to trace a very fine line here. Again, you want to thin down your paints with water so you have superior control when applying these fine details. That done, it's time to begin basing in all of the leather areas on the model. And for this, I'm starting with dark stone on the areas like here on his belt. I like dark stone because it is a brownish gray tone, and I think it's going to work up a really complementary brown tone to the reds, greens, and of course the bone armor on the model. So I'm just going to apply this very carefully, apply 2 thin coats to the belt, and of course the holster for his pistol. It's a pretty giant pistol if you ask me, hanging off of his hip. Now moving on to Werewolf Fur. This is one of my favorite brown tones in our lineup. It's kind of a grayish, lightish brown tone. It's great for base coating bones like we did when we added our pre-shadow or post-shadow with the airbrush. I'm going to use this to highlight up our dark stone just to create some simple blends here. It'll be our final highlight color as well because we will be applying a wash, and this is just to add some blending to these leather areas, much like we did on the robes and tunic of the model. So I've thinned down some werewolf fur, and I'm just going to apply this, and this is a great example of how I'm going to do this here on the back of the pouch. I'm just going to start at the very bottom, and I'm just going to pull very thin down paint upwards, leaving our base tone of dark stone in the top. I'm going to go back and just reinforce that highlight at the bottom. Our paint is very loose, very wet on our wet palette. Now I'm going to go back and grab some of my dark stone, and I'm going to wet blend that back in. And we got a nice, just very simple gradient. This is very easy to pull off at home. I hope you do go home and experiment with techniques like these because they are much easier than they might appear. Now we're going to apply a shade to the model. We're using Quickshade Strong Tone, which is one of our fan favorites and customer favorites, one of our best-selling washes in our lineup because it is so versatile and it works just so well. A lot of people call this magic in a bottle, and that is true. So we're going to apply this to all the areas that we just base coated in our brown tones, like the leather strap around his wrists and of course the holster. Now we're just looking to apply this almost as a glaze to tie in those blends that we made, but we do want the pigments to work their way into the recesses. Careful not to let it pull up too much on the model. And now I'm just going to go back with some werewolf fur, and you see I'm just going to pull some very simple highlights. I'm using my detail brush here and thin down paint just to pick out the hard edges and corners on the model. All right, we are nearing the end now. Now it's time to base all of the other areas on the model that will be a grayish white, like the skeleton on the model and any of the little pieces of ribbon. And for this, I'm using Stone Golem. Normally I use skeleton bone, but since this model is such a bony color, I wanted something to slightly differentiate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work in gray and white tones with a brownish wash to give a slightly different bony parchment effect. Now that our stone golem has dried, I'm going to move on to applying a wash. And for this wash, I do something a little bit different. I actually mix in a little bit of light tone with about 1 drop of Quickshade blue tone, and then I thin it down with our Quickshade wash mixing medium. The reason I like to do this is by just that little application, that 1 drop of the blue tone, it helps to shift the tonality to it and makes it a little bit grayer. Now you could always make it even more gray by applying a little bit more blue tone and thinning it down even further, but I'm liking where we're at here with this colored wash. This is going to be a very light wash just to pick out the details and add a little tone to all of these areas that we've previously painted in Stone Golem. Just going to very simply apply this all over these areas, and we'll come back to apply our first highlight. Not everything has been washed down. We're going to go back and reestablish some of that base tone. We're going to try and just feather this in. So in some areas we want to leave the wash in on even the flat panels. So you see some ridges on the parchment here. I'm using very thin down paints, and in some areas I just want to leave it. So I'm just kind of feathering the stone golem in and blending it into the wash that we've previously added, working up back to pure stone golem like so. Very simple. Now on the skeleton, you're just going to want to be a little bit careful, and we're going to be a little bit more focused with this application. We're just going to apply this to the most protruding areas of the bone. We want this to look like a dirty skeleton that's really been on this captain or sergeant shield for a very, very long time. So we're just very simply going to go find the most raised areas on the skeleton and pick them out. All right, and our first application of our Stone Golem highlight is complete. Now I'm just moving on to white. I'm using matte white from our Warpaints range. Our matte white has extremely good coverage. I love using it. I was just talking to our good friend Duncan Rhodes at the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, and he is a huge fan of our matte white. Shout out to our friend Duncan. Just go check out his website, duncanrhodes.com. He makes great videos. He's been using quite a few of our paints and brushes. So I'm just going to apply this matte white highlight just to the hard edges of all of the areas that we previously painted in Stone Golem. Just very simply like so. Then on the skeleton, we'll move on and we'll apply a similar highlight, but leaving more of the Stone Golem in the recesses. Just want to pick out the hard edges because we do want to make this skeleton look like it's been here for a very long time. Now it's time to move on to all of the metallics on the armor, and we're going to start by painting in everything that we want to be a brassy silver. For that, we're using a new metallic paint that we're working on for a new upcoming metallic paint set. We use this in a recent tutorial. It's called Evil Chrome, and I love it. It's a nice, soft, brassy bronze color, and I think it lends itself really well to different highlights. You could work this up to a nice gold using, bright gold, greedy gold, or you could work this up to a silver. We're going to try that route today. So I'm just going to apply this in 2 thin coats all over the model, all of the areas that we wish to be metallic. So I like, oftentimes when I'm working on models, especially ones that are as highly detailed as this one, I like to keep the metallics pretty simple. I like to stay within 1 color range if possible. No more than 2. Now we are going to be painting the sword in a slightly different color. That's something that we asked our friends at the Hobby Brigade, a new Facebook group, to vote on a poll. What color sword did they want to see on this model? And they said that they wanted to see a turquoise metal. So that's what we're going to do today. Before that, we got to block in all of the other metallic areas on the model. So just take your time, find the areas that would be metal, like these little exhaust ports on this power pack. And of course, you don't want to miss the butt of the sword here. With all the metal applied, we're just going to apply a wash of Quickshade Strong Tone across all of the metal areas on the model. Just very simple. Just want to allow this to work its way into the recesses and pick out the details on all of the metal areas. All right, and here we are with the wash applied. Now this next step might be a little unorthodox to some. I've got some bright gold on my palette, and I'm just going to add some very rough, almost dry brushed edge highlights with the bright gold. I'm just going to showcase this here. I'm not too worried about it being super precise. We're just trying to get some of that bright gold etched on there. I might take my finger and just dab at it a bit, and then I'll go to the shining silver, and I'm going to do the same thing, but just a little bit more focused. And I'm just picking out the hard corners and edges just to add a very rough metallic appearance. So for example, back here on, I'm going to flip the model over, back here on this exhaust port, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll add a nice smooth highlight every now and then just to reinforce those hard edges like here. And then I'm going to go back to my silver and I'm just going to dab a bit of that on there. It gives a very realistic appearance. The color is bouncing between the gold and the silver, and we've got that brassy undertone. So we're working with cooler, brighter tones like the shining silver as well as the warmer yellow tones of the gold and the copper that you have in that base tone. This gives a pretty rustic look to the metal, and I really enjoy how it looks, and it's just super fun to apply because it's just pretty sporadic here. So I'm going to start by applying some of that bright gold right in the upper 1/3, and then I will feather and kind of stipple it out. I'll go back and grab some of that shining silver, and I'll just stipple some into the upper portion. And there we go. We've got like a really nice brassy sheen going on. So I'm going to go around and apply this to the rest of the areas on the model. Now, you could substitute this technique by just applying a simple highlight. This new metallic that we're working with lends itself really well, as I said, to golds and silver highlights. And in this case, I'm just going to apply a little bit of both to give it kind of that brassy effect. But you could just stick with one or the other to keep it more traditional if you'd like. So I'm going to finish all of these areas on the rest of the model. And then we're going to move on to the base. We're going to save the sword for last. Thinking about a base for this model, I could have gone in many different directions, but for this particular base, I figured I'd go with an icy theme. My good friend Vinny plays Dark Angels, and he likes to have an icy snow base on his. So when I'm trying out new color schemes and painting different factions that I don't particularly play, I always like to try and emulate what my friends are playing. So for starters here, I'm going to apply an even base coat of Hydra Turquoise all over the base. You want to get a nice solid coat here, so you may need to thin this down and apply 2 thin coats just to ensure that all of the paint and pigment works its way into all of the nooks and crannies. I've got a bit of Ice Storm and my Masterclass Drybrush, and I'm going to apply a very heavy dry brush over top of our Hydra Turquoise. Careful not to get this on any other areas on the model. And now with a bit of Gorgon Hide, we're going to go back over top and just make this highlight a little bit brighter, make it a little bit more icier. And you can already begin to see the icy effect that we're going for begin to take effect. And we haven't even applied any other techniques, just a couple simple layers and dry brushing. So I've got an old piece of blister from one of our brush sets that I like to use as a palette. You can see I've got some glue, I've got some shreds of Battlefield's Tufts on here, and this is what I use when I need to make a mess. So what I've got going on here is I've got a little bit of our matte white paint mixed in with our Battlefield's basing snow. I'm just going to take a bit of that mixture and I'm going to apply it on the areas of the base where I think that snow would collect, like the tops of the rocks here and these rocks back here. I'm going to go all over the miniature and apply this custom snow effect that I made and just find the areas that I think snow would look good on this Arctic icy base. After giving that some time to dry, I'm just going to finish it off with the aptly named Frozen Tufts. So there's our base, all finished up. I just added some matte black to the rim of it, and I think it looks pretty sharp, and it was pretty simple. I could imagine replicating this across multiple units would be really easy. So we're gonna get to this sword. Now, I asked everybody in the Hobby Brigade what color they wanted me to paint this. I gave them several different options, and they settled on metallic turquoise. So I'm gonna be using a couple of the new paints from our new metallic paint set that we are working on. This is a blue metallic. This is the first time I've gotten a chance to use it here. Now I'm just going to start with that, and I'm going to work it into all over the model, actually, all over this sword. Just try something different. I've never painted a turquoise sword either, so we're all learning this at the same time, and that's part of the fun of painting, is trying out new things. So I'm just going to apply this blue metallic, just one simple light coat, just to get a good base tone for our metallic paints. I've watered this down with just a little bit of clean water, and can't forget the other side here. I'm starting with blue because obviously turquoise is kind of a bluish green, or greenish blue, whichever way you look at it, and we need to have a dark point. I'm going to add some blending effects to the sword to give it a really cool sheen to it. At least I'm going to try to. This is a technique I've not quite tried to do before, but like I said, it's not fun unless you're learning something new. So let's all learn something a little bit new today. So I have our blue paint on our palette here on the sword. I'm going to move to our turquoise. So I'm just going to thin that down with a little bit of water. And I'm going to start applying this turquoise in the center of the blade here. I'm going to work my way from the top down to the center, leaving some of that blue in the very center there, or at the very bottom, the hilt of the blade. So focusing this turquoise metallic on the top, leaving some of that blue. We're almost wet blending with metallic paints here. This is a technique that you often see when people are trying to paint non-metallic metals. Well, we're going to replicate some of those techniques while painting true metallic metals. So just applying the turquoise, just a very light pass as we blend it into our blue metallic. So now we're just going to take some of the blue tone and we're going to apply essentially the reverse technique but on the lettering inside of the sword. I'm being very careful here, using very smooth brush strokes. Once I get that applied, I'll go back to our turquoise metallic and just kind of blend the two together for a nice seamless transition. You can see I already got started on some of that blue metallic on the reverse side. And then I'm going back to our turquoise metallic just to smooth that out and blend that in, like so. Once that's complete, I've mixed in a bit of our effects paint. We have an effects metallic. Right now we're calling it fairy dust, but it might have a different name. We've also talked around calling it white dragon. We're not really sure, but this is basically a white metallic, but the properties of it are that you can almost thin it down and use it as a medium or even a glazing effect to get some really cool techniques. I like mixing it with these new colored metallics. In this case, I mixed it with our turquoise just to brighten it up a bit. Now I'm applying this mixture of our fairy dust effects metallic with our turquoise metallic, and I'm just going to apply it to the tip of the sword and the very tip of the lettering inside of the sword, like so. And we'll come back and blend those together a little bit smoother with our turquoise metallic. And we've got a nice gradation from our blue metallic to turquoise to this lighter turquoise thanks to our metallic effects paint. And again, we're just going to apply a bit of that to the opposite side of the lettering in the center of the blade. Now that's had a bit of time to dry, I'm going to apply a 50-50 mix of our Quickshade blue tone and Quickshade green tone just to reinforce the definition and the turquoiseness, if that's a word, to this blade. Careful not to get this on any of the other metallics that we've painted, and you can see how that helps blend the three different metallic colors that we were working with together. And it also helps us to redefine some of the details on the model. All right, and all I'm going to do is take a bit of that 50-50 mix of the turquoise metal and our effects metallic, and I'm just going to pick out some of the hard edges and details on this sword. You could go even further if you wanted to and apply more details or weathering to your model. It's really up to you, but I like where we're at with this one. We spent a little bit more time on this than we would a standard rank and file troop, but with all this detail, it was really asking for you to spend some hard work and attention to it. So, very excited with how this has turned out so far. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something today. Let us know in the comments what you think and what else you'd like to see from the Army Painter Studio. And there we have it, our Deathwing Knight is complete, and I've really enjoyed painting up this model, and I love the little conversion bits that we were able to pull off with the wings and the sword to make it look more like the fabled Dark Angels from Games Workshop. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this model for you today. Remember that you can find all of the paints and products used in today's tutorial from your friendly local game store, online from your favorite retailers such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.